The extraordinary consistory just celebrated had been perceived as a moment of real confrontation, almost a test bench to measure the concrete direction of the first months of the pontificate. Expectations were not marginal. For weeks, the idea had been circulating among cardinals, observers, and the most attentive ecclesiastical circles that some issues that had remained pending in recent years should finally emerge explicitly. Among these, one in particular, the liturgical question and the treatment reserved for the traditional Roman rite after Traditionis Custodes. This wasn't a media stunt or external pressure. Several cardinals had said, before the meeting began, that they expected a discussion on this issue as well. The widespread idea was that the consistory could become a space for frank discussion, at least among members of the College of Cardinals, on what profoundly divides the ecclesial body today. These premises, however, were quickly contradicted by the facts. From the very beginning of the meeting, a clear gap emerged between expectations and the actual agenda. 4 topics were initially identified, however, with a motivation attributed to alleged time constraints. It was communicated that only 2 of them would actually be discussed. The decision was presented not as a merit-based choice, but as an organizational necessity. Yet it is precisely this apparent procedural neutrality that has sparked the most criticism. At that point, an internal vote was introduced, a formal but decisive step. Through that vote, the cardinals present established the order of priorities. The topics open to discussion were synodality and evangelization. However, both the liturgy and the relationship between the Roman Curia and the dioceses were excluded. It is here that, according to many observers, the consistory stopped being merely a collegial event and became an ecclesial political signal. The liturgy was not postponed to a future date. It wasn't even the subject of preliminary discussion. It was simply excluded from the royal agenda. Formally, there's nothing to stop it from being discussed in other contexts, but in reality, when deciding what to discuss when time is limited, what's left out takes on a specific meaning. The widespread feeling, especially in circles linked to liturgical tradition, is that it was not an oversight, but a conscious choice. A choice that signals a hierarchy of urgency, processes first, then content, synodal structures first, then what for centuries has been considered the visible heart of the Church's life. Statements made by some cardinals on the sidelines of the proceedings reinforced this interpretation. When asked about restrictions on the traditional Roman rite, several cardinals expressed a position of substantial indifference. Not outright hostility, but not real interest either. Some recalled having only encountered that liturgy as young altar servers without practicing it today. Others spoke openly about an issue that doesn't concern them. These words, read in isolation, might seem marginal, but when placed in the context of the consistory, they take on significant symbolic weight. Indifference, in a time of ecclesial tension, is never neutral. It becomes an implicit stance, especially when a significant portion of the faithful experience the liturgical question as an open wound. From the traditionalist front, reactions were immediate. The consistory was interpreted as a managed event, rather than one truly discussed. The impression is that the intention was to avoid a direct confrontation, indefinitely postponing an issue that continues to generate division, suffering, and misunderstanding. Many are speaking of a temporary strategy, not addressing now what could create visible fractures. In this sense, the voting mechanism itself has been the subject of critical analysis. The procedure is legitimate, of course. But the way it was introduced, after the preliminary reduction of topics, gave the impression of a predefined framework. The question is not so much whether the vote was valid, but whether the scope of the vote was truly free. Thus, the internal dynamics within the College of Cardinals emerge. On the one hand, compact blocks, often originating from contexts where the liturgical question is not perceived as central. On the other hand, a minority more sensitive to the issue, numerically insufficient to impose the topic on the common agenda. The result is an imbalance that reflects a broader fracture, that between a church conceived as a global process and a church rooted in precise ritual forms. The Holy See's official statement attempted to calm the tension. In a briefing following the sessions, it was stated that liturgical issues nevertheless fall within the broader framework of mission and evangelization. A formula that, however, has convinced few. Including the liturgy as an implicit sub-theme is equivalent for many to emptying it of its specificity. Discussing the Mass as an autonomous issue or as a simple instrument functional to the mission is not the same thing. And it is precisely here that the most profound ecclesiological crux lies. For the traditional view, the liturgy is not a means, but a source. Evangelization isn't necessary, it's already evangelization. Pushing it to the margins of the debate implicitly redefines the Church's priorities. The Consistory, therefore, did not resolve the liturgical question. It suspended it. But every suspension in ecclesiastical history has a cost. Unaddressed tensions tend to escalate. The most sensitive believers interpret silences as signals, and signals in an age of constant communication matter as much, if not more, than words. Ultimately, this consistory speaks volumes primarily for what it didn't say. Not for the papers presented, not for the topics addressed, but for those excluded. The liturgy, once again, remains outside the decision-making center, while the perception of an ever-widening gap between institutional priorities and the expectations of a significant portion of the Catholic population grows. This isn't a concluded conflict, it's a fault line that remains open. And precisely for this reason, the recently concluded consistory cannot be dismissed as a mere technical transition. It's a signal, and like any signal, it will be interpreted, discussed, and likely contested in the months to come. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment, Amen. God bless you.